You do have to negotiate and collaborate to get anywhere, and I'm a real believer in that. I look around at the communities I work with, I look at how I work myself with other businesses, and collaboration is absolutely the key. I know it's an overused word, but if it's done properly, it works. So working in central government, I managed to, I guess, establish some fantastic networks right across the political spectrum, which was really good and has set me up well for my current work, but also learning to negotiate and also learning, I guess, at some stage you do have to have a bottom line, and you do need to stay true to your values, and that's actually for me has been really helpful. There have been times when I won't work on a project because I don't share the same values as that particular project, or I don't agree with the way that it's going, the project's sort of come about and how they're delivering on it. So having your bottom lines and your values is important.
This is the Ryan Marketing Show, and you're listening to episode 90 of 100. Today on the show, I have Jenni Giblin from the Giblin Group, based in Hastings, but doing work all over New Zealand and now into Australia. The Giblin Group assists local and central government, iwi and hapu, to develop and deliver plans and projects. But there's a lot more to it than that. It sounds so easy, doesn't it?
It does.
Let's dive right in, because I don't think a lot of people who listen to the show would understand what a lot of the role you play as Giblin Group between all these different stakeholders. What's at your core? What does your business do, and how does that help communities and business and government?
Well, Giblin Group exists to help build vibrant communities across the country. And we do that by working alongside councils, iwi hapu, and helping them deliver on their plans and projects. And there's 4 areas that we specifically work in. We work around capital raising, so that's about bringing the money in. We also offer a service around community engagement and communications at a strategic level, so that's about telling the story of a particular project or a particular community. We also help with relationship brokering, so that could be between central and local government, between local government and iwi, between private sector and central government. And the 4th area that we work in is around, providing the analytical information that needs to go alongside each of the government applications, or the case documents that we need to prepare. So that's around business studies, feasibility studies, that kind of thing, revenue generation strategies.
How does that all start off? Because part is funding, part someone's got to have the idea, and it sounds like then the part you play is looking at, well, how credible is that idea to bring to life, or where could the money come from? What tends to be the first step when one of those stakeholders comes to you? Well,
generally what happens is that either, and particularly in the local government sector, either a mayor or a politician or a chief executive has an idea that they want to build something, or they want to renovate or refurbish a particular facility they may have in their community. Or the community has gone to the council and said, hey, look, we desperately need this particular facility, or we want a swimming pool, or whatever it might be. So an idea is generated. The council will then look at it, and normally they say, well, look, we can't afford to do this. So they then contact us and say, well, look, is there an opportunity to partner up with other organisations, whether that's central government or the private sector or the charitable sector, to see if we can pull this project together. Now, lots of the projects that we are approached to work on really are great ideas, but they're not feasible. So the first thing you really need to do, and we say this to our clients, is you really need to determine, is it feasible? Does the project stack up? And do the community really want it? Because in the end, there's no point delivering something to the community that, 1, they can't afford, and 2, that they don't actually want. So that community buy-in is absolutely vital to a project. If it's not done properly, the project will stall. And secondly, if you can't pull the funding together, it's not going to happen either. So we come in, particularly early on in the project, to check the community. Just a bit of sense check, really. Does the community want it? Can they pull it together? And then we would start working around some pre-scoping and looking at some pre-feasibility work around a particular project. We also work with a large number of project managers and architects around the country. So often we get pulled into particular smaller councils that don't know where to start. That they know they want to see a sports stadium, but they have no idea who are the right people to pull together, how do they go about doing it, what's the sequence, because there is a methodology and a sequence around what works and what doesn't work. And so we come to the table and provide them a whole lot of information around how they go about doing it. And these things don't happen overnight. So often we're having to manage expectations with councils to say, look, I know you want a new swimming pool, but actually that's not going to happen in 6 months' time. So, working through all of that.
Because these are large projects, right? These aren't hundreds of thousands, these are millions of dollars.
Yes.
They're strategic of nature. They will have a significant impact, positive or negative, on the community depending on how they're executed. How do you go about dealing with all of those different stakeholders? Because you mentioned there that getting the community on board, it's one thing to get them on board, but then it's another to get them on board and actually fulfill on the promise. I guess you will have people that want it to happen but don't necessarily want to commit until they know it's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. The timing is everything, and it is a roller coaster journey. So in terms of the community, if a project stacks up and the community think it's a good idea, that's great, but actually then you've got to go through that roller coaster ride of pulling the funding in, managing expectations from the various community groups, and we live in a society where there's still a lot of patch protection that goes on, so managing and negotiating between various groups that may want to use a facility and bringing them on board throughout the length of the project, which normally be around about 2 or 3 years we'd work on a particular project for. So keeping them engaged for that period of time, it can be quite challenging at times. But we do that. Also, I think it is important to make sure that when we're checking these projects, are they aligning to existing strategies that are already in place, to make sure that we, I guess, are following through a proper process.
Now, over that type of period of time, like 2 to 3 years, a lot can change, particularly with the types of stakeholders you deal with, local government, central government, in particular when we're in an election year now.
Yes.
How does your methodology cope with those constant changes of power base as well as access to capital?
Yeah, that is a huge challenge for projects, particularly in the three yearly cycle, and because they the general election and the local body elections are a year apart. There's a lot of change that can happen. That's something that we would flag up front. And so we would spend quite a bit of time on the project prior to an election and prior to both of the elections to look at, who are the likely mayors that we're going to have at the table? What is the political environment going to be like? And one thing that we advocate, particularly within projects that require central government support, is that I guess the relationship management is done across parties.
Right.
That's really important, so that we're not just focusing on dealing with the local MP that happens to be in the government at that particular time. So taking a broader approach always works.
That must create some really interesting boardroom discussions when you've got politicians and business and philanthropy around a table, potentially with other issues that they're at loggerheads about, and here you've managed to get them all around a table. And how do you then go about negotiating and making sure that those discussions are fruitful and deliver something?
It is really difficult, and often it's personality based, and sometimes it doesn't always work, because there are very strong, personalities and opinions around the table. But, I think we encourage, I guess, some of the trickier issues to be left at the door. And that, I think we have in our governance structures around the country, a level of maturity that most politicians come to the table realising that in actual fact they're here to discuss a particular issue or a particular project, and generally by and large they focus on that. So, but it is, it is careful management, but it's very much on a project by project basis, depending who's sitting at the table. But I've certainly been involved with projects where we've had a local MP that's really supported particular project, and then there's been a change, and often there can be a change in a mayor over if the community don't like a project. I mean, we had that with the Len Lai Centre. We had Harry Dynhoven as the mayor, and then he was he wasn't re-elected, and a new mayor came in, Andrew Judd, who hadn't been particularly supportive of Len Lai, so that it certainly makes it tricky.
Yet you managed to deliver on that project.
We did.
Based in New Plymouth.
Yes, we did. That was a really a fantastic project, and it has proven to be the most amazing project in terms of getting visitor use. And so early predictions that we did in the pre-planning stage of the project was that I think we estimated around 90,000 visitors to Lenlai. Well, they had hit that target within 9 months of operation.
Wow.
So it's gone on to be a huge success.
So whoever did the feasibility part or the validation on
Yes.
volumes of people going in
Yes.
has done that in a very, in a great way. That's what you want. You want the estimations to be bang on or slightly
Absolutely.
underestimated or overestimated.
So Burl did that piece of work around the economic analysis for that, and they did it was really good. And they did take a conservative approach, which was good because there is no point plucking figures out of the air and saying that suddenly you're going to have 150,000 people through your doors when you open a facility. And if that's very unlikely to happen, you then get a disgruntled community, you get a disgruntled council, and actually reputationally it's not particularly good for your company to be doing that sort of stuff.
I think that's the biggest one, is the reputation. Like I think we've all seen projects where they look great on paper, and if you can trust the numbers, then you know that the community will back it.
Yes.
And then it plays out that actually the numbers included people that were going to a different area of the building for different reasons and actually weren't going for the experience
Yes.
in the main part of the building.
And it's about, we find that when we're writing our revenue generation strategy. So it's really easy to sit down and write a strategy about where you're going to get large sums of money from. That's the easy part actually. The difficult part's the implementation. So we really pride ourselves on making sure that the advice we're giving is ground truthed. So when we are writing our strategies and we're doing our predictions, we meet with potential people we're going to be asking for funding, and we really check to make sure that that's right. Because, if we're going to produce documents that don't add up, our work is going to dry up pretty quickly.
I like that saying, ground truth.
Yes.
How do you go about getting that? Do you use a lot of the digital channels, or is this actually going out and meeting people and chatting to?
It's going out and meeting people. So we spend a lot of time in developing a revenue generation strategy actually chatting to people. So two things where we generally want to understand is what's the likelihood of getting funding in, because at the end of the day, if the council's going to spend a huge amount of money on a strategy that doesn't stack up, they get pretty cross. So we want to understand the likelihood, and look, that can change from time to time because, as you mentioned before, over a period of a project, personnel can change, politicians can change, so it's not always guaranteed, but it's normally pretty accurate. And the second thing that we want to find out in our ground truthing is, do the community really want it? Because particularly if we're working in a community where we don't live, so I'm based here in Hawke's Bay, but if we're working on a project over in New Plymouth, for instance, and we're being told by the council that the community really like the project, I really like to know for myself that the community does really want that particular project to go ahead. So we do a lot of that ground truthing, and it's a really valuable exercise to do. Two things: one, we get the information we need, but also it helps us establish really good relationships. And at the end of the day, if you don't have good relationships, these projects don't fly.
It takes the community to back it.
Absolutely.
And I think, you're right, anywhere that you don't have the community backing or think you can speak on behalf of the community, it's the little things that trip you up. I know that I was working for a company in London where there was a social enterprise side of it, and they were delivering computers and PCs into Africa, Malawi and Kenya, Uganda and so on. Great thing, reuse, recycle. No one had thought of the software. So the kids couldn't learn because there was no software on it.
Yes.
That could help them learn. And then the software that did go on there didn't reflect tribal huts. It had city houses.
Yes.
And no one had thought about the community. So it had to be reverse engineered from coalface back to get it right.
Absolutely. And you've got to think about things, I'm always push for affordability. So it's great to have a new complex, and actually getting the capital for a new complex or facility is one thing. Looking at how the council's going to continue to pay for it over the life of that project is another, and then also looking at, are the community going to use it? Are they going to be able, is it affordable to, right across the community? Or who's going to be using it? Really important considerations.
I've noticed in Napier with how they've been, because there's been a huge amount of change, and I interviewed Wade and Jack early on in the series, and I asked him, how are you going about deciding what gets funded and what you do and don't do? And he said that they would do a little part and see what the community thought of it and see what people liked and didn't like. before they invested the big sum to go and do something that was more permanent. And I thought that was quite a smart way of doing real life testing on
Yes.
ideas to
Yes.
see whether the community will like it. This is a quite a specialised area that you operate in. You've worked in other areas prior to this. Let's talk a little bit about what you learned from working at local government with the Hastings District Council and in your central government roles getting two disparate political parties to come to a confidence and supply agreement.
Well, actually, working in Parliament with United Future Party and the Labour government was fantastic grounding for me because it was all about negotiation. So my role within that was to work alongside Heather Simpson, who was based in the Prime Minister's office, negotiating on pieces of legislation as they were coming up to make sure that we could get some sort of agreement individually on each piece of legislation as it went through the House. So I learned a lot about patience, but I also learned a lot about how you manage people, I guess, and also that you do have to negotiate and collaborate to get anywhere. And I'm a real believer in that. I look around at the communities I work with. I look at how I work myself with other businesses, and collaboration is absolutely the key. I know it's an overused word, but if it's done properly, it works. So working in central government, I managed to, I guess, establish some fantastic networks right across the political spectrum, which was really good and has set me up well for my current work, but also learning to negotiate and also learning, I guess, at some stage you do have to have a bottom line and you do need to stay true to your values, and that's actually for me has been really helpful. There have been times when I won't work on a project because I don't share the same values as that particular project, or I don't agree with the way that it's going, the project's sort of come about and how they're delivering on it. So having your bottom lines and your values is important. Working at the Hastings District Council was fantastic. I came in, I was based there, but I was working for the 5 Hawke's Bay councils actually. So from Central Hawke's Bay, Wairoa Regional Council, Napier and Hastings on the regional community outcomes as part of the Local Government Act 2002. So I arrived in Hawke's Bay and didn't have any contacts as such, but I instantly, was networked into the business community, networked into the local government community, and networked into iwi and hapu, which was fantastic. So again, negotiating, because actually working with 5 councils on one project is like herding cats.
I was going to mention that phrase, and I thought, I don't know how I'm going to get it in there, but you beat me to it.
Yeah, and each chief executive had a different idea of the outcome of the project, and had a different idea on timeframes and a different idea on who should be consulted with and who shouldn't. But that project was set aside for 2 years, and I managed to finish it, I think, in just over a year. So it was really successful, and it was held up within local government circles as a really good process. And so I think that was something. Hawke's Bay was really leading the way, doing a collaborative approach around that. So that was really exciting. So instantly, I guess I was networked in, and again doing a lot of negotiation, which I really like.
What don't each of the parties know about each other that you get to see from a high level, dealing with each of the differences? Because usually when you try to get people to agreement, it's knowing or understanding why they're doing what they're doing, the motivation, not the action, but the motivation around it.
Yeah.
Are they motivated in different ways?
Totally. Absolutely. And so looking back at that process, and that is going back about 12 years, but they were motivated in different ways, and they also their communities had different expectations. So what was important for Hastings community at a point in time was quite different from Wairoa.
Right.
Different geographic location, different community makeup. But I think I see that they don't is that I think we all get, you get in your little bubble, don't you? And you get so engrossed in what's going on in your own organisation that actually it's really hard to step out of that and think, well, hang on a minute, what's happening in this other council, that actually this is why they are coming from this particular perspective. So I just think they probably don't step back enough. And when you come in, I guess, as a consultant, you've got more of a overall view or a helicopter view of what's going on. And then you have the ability to say, hey, look, I think the reason why this particular council's got this particular opinion is because they're faced with X, Y, and Z, and you can help, I guess, bring them out of their bubbles a bit, I suppose, for want of a better word, and understand and have a bit more compassion for what's going on in these other communities, because we have got very diverse communities in Hawke's Bay.
Because the tension part itself isn't a bad thing. You always want organisations to have some people that are completely about keeping what they've built
Yes.
alive and keeping their values alive, but you also need those that are more willing to take a step either into the unknown or out of business as usual.
Yes.
Over the 2 to 3 years, do you find that organisational culture shifts, or is it always about negotiating those same types of differences?
I think organisational cultures do change, and I think they change with the leader at the top. I do think I've seen chief executives come and go from councils, and I think that does change the culture of what's happening within the council. It can also result in massive changes of staff, and that can be good and bad good and bad offering. But I do see organisations change. Yeah.
Now, you're not one to rest on your laurels. You've conquered New Zealand, all the councils
Yes.
you've had dealings with, not just out in Hawke's Bay, but outside. You're about to, or just have launched in Australia. What differences are you expecting there in local government, and what would you like, if you were to fast forward 10 years, and what would you like to have achieved in the Australia expansion?
Well, I think for us at the moment, we've got here in New Zealand, we're considered the leading company in our space, which is fantastic. So, I guess fast forwarding 10 years, I would really be aiming for the same in Australia, and that's a huge goal. But I love those big challenges. That's great. That's what gets you out of bed every morning, and I love it when people say no, so you can really try to beat that back. The reason for us heading into Australia is twofold. First of all, is that there's a limited number of clients we can get in Hawke's Bay, in New Zealand, because we work mainly in the local government sector, and we have a really good penetration throughout the councils in Hawke's Bay and New Zealand. But thinking about Australia, they don't have a lot of consultancy services that work in the way that we do. So traditionally over in Australia, the government pays for everything. So, and it's whether that's local government, state or federal, they pay for all their facilities. So this idea of, I guess, collaborating around facilities is quite new for them. I'm particularly interested in working in communities that are outside of the main centres. I'm particularly interested in working in regional communities, because that's actually what I like doing here in New Zealand. I'm really into this regional renaissance stuff, because I always say that's where the real people live. And I think that actually providing good facilities and good services for people in those communities can be absolutely life-changing, and they can and that can really lift a community up. And I've seen it here in New Zealand, and we'd like to start doing some of that work in Australia, because this model in New Zealand, I started working about 9 years ago on it, and nobody else was in this space. And traditionally, councils paid for absolutely everything. There might have been the odd time, central government put some money in, but generally, ratepayers paid for everything. And I thought, heck, this isn't right. There is a different way to skin the cat around facilities, and that's, I guess, the thinking I'd like to take into Australia. And the research we've done to date shows that there is definitely a market for it.
Interesting, because with any type of project, the money will appear if it's doing the right things for the right stakeholders. So
Yes.
If that's always hamstrung by one organisation, which happens to be a council, then the council will have influence over every single project. Yet, now that we're right into the 21st century, there are far more sources of funding. There's philanthropic, there is crowdfunding.
Yes.
So the money's less of the issue now. It's more around making sure that when people back something, it's going to happen in the way they expect it to.
Absolutely. I mean, one, there's the money, and you're right, for a good project the money will always come in. But actually, I think it's the intangible benefits that you get from collaborating with other organisations that actually make projects fly, and that's what lifts up communities.
Do you think the actual project becomes a better project because more people
Absolutely.
have an input to it?
Totally, and I think they end up being designed better. I think the community buy in because they feel they've been part of the project. Hastings Council did that particularly well with the Opera House when they renovated that in 2005, I think it was completed, 2005, 2006. And with that project, they brought the community with them the entire way. And I remember there were opportunities for people to participate in how the facility was going to function. There were opportunities for people to make donations, just putting $2 over the counter encounter at New World, just tiny little opportunities for people to have their say and to contribute if they wanted to. When that facility was opened and we had an open weekend, I couldn't believe the amount of people as I was walking around that were saying that they felt part of this. And so from a little contribution, it was very, very empowering. And actually that's followed on with the fact that it's now closed due to earthquake strengthening, and the council's gone back out to the community, and overwhelmingly the community have said, we love this facility, it's really important to us, we feel like we're part of it, and it's important to us, so please reopen it and get it fixed. So bringing the community along the way is so important. Equally, within the corporate sector, if I look at the Lenlai Centre, we secured the $3 million contribution from the Todd family, Todd Foundation, and Todd came on board to the project, and it took around about 2 years of negotiations to give $3 million, but that is the largest corporate sponsorship of any arts facility in New Zealand. The $3 million was absolutely amazing. It was split. $2.5 million was for the actual facility, and $500,000 was for ongoing operational costs around an education program. Brilliant. But in addition to that, Todd Energy came on board as the biggest champions for the project. They were amazing. They brought technical expertise to the table. Their staff were engaged with the project. They all became ambassadors for the project. They enabled other organisations to come on board and support it. That was suppliers of theirs that also bought into the idea of bringing this facility to New Plymouth. So the intangible benefits that they brought were much greater than the $3 million. So giving, I guess, organisations or people the opportunity to participate in a project can be hugely beneficial.
So this is more than just the money side of it. This is, you're pioneering a different approach to decision making across multiple stakeholders, which does away with a lot of what we expect in business in the 20th century is around command and control.
Yes.
And you're much more around collaboration, bringing people on the journey. Everyone then feels part of it, so that when hiccups do happen, they always happen,
yes,
the right people can come up with the right answers to solve it before it becomes a bigger issue.
Absolutely, and that the people, the stakeholders are sitting around the table and everybody's aware of what's going on. Collaboration takes a long time. So that's if you're looking at the pros and cons of collaboration, and I guess for communities that can be frustrating from time to time, probably for councils it can be frustrating, but I think the outcome is much better.
So Giblin Group must be a really interesting place to work then.
Oh, it's fantastic. We work with some amazing communities around the country. We've worked with some amazing architects that are truly outstanding, doing some fantastic things. We work with passionate people in communities that volunteer and give huge amounts of time and effort and passion to projects. And I go home at night and think, gosh, we live in a fantastic place, and we are surrounded in our business with very positive people. It's amazing.
We haven't covered this, so I need to cover this before we wrap up. Where does your drive come from to do this?
Well, I remember being at high school and being told that, I should leave school and become a receptionist, which I would be absolutely useless at because I'm not particularly good on attention to detail. But I did that. I left school and I went and worked in an office, and it was dreadful, and I was dreadful. And I have this view that actually when people tell you can't do something, you've got to push through the boundaries. Anything is absolutely possible. So that's a view I share with my 5 children. It's a view my husband and I share in our farming business, and it's a view that I have for Giblin Group. Because I remember when I first started off, someone saying to me, oh, you'll never be able to get work out of Hawke's Bay. Well, look, within 2 years we were working across the country. So I guess what drives me is the ability to keep pushing the boundaries. And also there is a huge amount of satisfaction when I travel around the country to think that, our company's been personally involved with most of the significant projects going on in New Zealand. I remember about 4 years ago, there was I don't know who did it, maybe Tourism New Zealand did it. I guess there was an article on the top 10 facilities to go and visit in New Zealand, and we'd been involved with all of them, and so I thought, that's pretty amazing. So yeah, there's some great things that we're really proud of around the country.
So for any stakeholders listening to this interview with Jenni right now, I'm taking away from this that the worst thing you can do is say no, because that's a fundamental driver for you to really dig in and kick in gear.
Well, I think we live in a country where, most things are possible. Granted, there are people that are in some really difficult situations. I absolutely believe that. But, if you've got desire and passion and drive and resilience, because I believe that resilience is the most important thing when you're in business, you can make things happen.
What would you like to see happen in Hawke's Bay?
I would like to see better collaboration between the councils. Absolutely. So working around the country, I see pockets of New Zealand where councils are collaborating and there's some fantastic things happening. And in Hawke's Bay, I think there is, definitely room to move in that space. At a level, the politicians get on, but we could be doing so much more in Hawke's Bay. And I think this, patch protection that we have, and it's not just in local government either, it's across Hawke's Bay, really does hinder us.
Given what you're seeing in other projects in other regions, what unrealised potential are we missing out on here? Because things look really good. Like, driving around, there is a lot of building, job vacancies, there are loads of postings online. It's very hard to find rental accommodation or buy houses. For all the economic indicators, things look like they're humming. Napier City Council is putting a huge amount of effort into redoing the city centre. Havelock North has got a skate bowl. Engineers are booked up months in advance. So I'm looking at it thinking, hey, what's wrong? There's nothing wrong. It's looking great. But what do you see other regions doing that we should be planning for or be doing now?
I think what other regions do better than us is that they have the ability to influence central government in a more coordinated way than we do. I think there's mixed messages that come out of Napier and Hastings to central government. I think we are sometimes viewed by central government as a bit of a basket case down here because it's really difficult to get the councils aligned on projects. Now, that's a generalisation. That's certainly not on every project, but I think that there is that view. So I think that and yes, we are going really well in Hawke's Bay, and that's great, but look, other regions are going equally as well, if not better, than Hawke's Bay. So I think we miss out on government funding for projects. I'm involved with a couple of projects that, are often at loggerheads between each other, and I think to myself, look, if you just collaborated and if you just had a conversation, these things could be resolved. So I think we've got a long way to go in Hawke's Bay. I look at Taranaki and I think they're a really good example. I look at what's happening up in the Bay of Plenty. We do a lot of work up there actually, and their councils collaborate very well up there. I look at what's happening in the Waikato. Again, we work with a lot of councils up that way, and I believe that they are more coordinated and certainly speak with a stronger voice.
That's going to take some fearless conversations, because what we do have in Hawke's Bay is 5 councils really close to where the community is. And what you're saying is that we need one voice into central government, so we've got 5 voices strength, all singing from the same hymn sheet.
Absolutely. So I'm not necessarily saying we need one council. I think we need a stronger, coordinated voice.
On the issues that matter.
On the issues that matter. And, when we don't work in the social service space at all, but, I think at a level Hawke's Bay is humming, but I think we have some pretty horrendous social statistics, which is not cool. And I think, maybe some more collaboration needs to happen to help in that space.
Now, there are people I've interviewed on the show who have access to significant funds from other philanthropy, for example, Next Foundation with Bill Kermode.
Yes.
And there are people out there who do want to participate and contribute to meaningful projects that they believe in, but they also want to know their money's going to be used in an effective manner. What's the best way of engaging your services or starting the conversation to be involved in projects you're already underway with?
Probably via a phone call or an email. We do, I spend a lot of time in terms of establishing and maintaining relationships. A huge amount of my day is talking to people and building trust and confidence. And I really value relationships I have, both with people that give money and also with people that I'm helping get the money to. And so that's probably the best way. I mean, I am a huge supporter of digital technology and online opportunities that there are for giving, but I also firmly believe that there's nothing like face-to-face contact.
You're entirely right. I totally agree with that. Digital is great for the efficiency,
Yes.
for contact remotely, but there's nothing like just pressing the flesh and having a chat one-to-one.
And I think when we're dealing with large amounts of money, and trust is so important. And so we're really strong on our ethics, and that's something that we actually live and breathe as a company every single day. We're all hot on it, and you have to be, because if our ethics drop and we don't endear trust to our clients, then my business is over.
I don't think there's any chance of that happening. You've certainly managed to navigate a number of projects and a number of conversations that would have been tough over a number of years since you formed Giblin Group back in 2008. And I admire your courage, and almost you don't want to stop. Like, this is New Zealand's part of it, but now to do this in Australia and bring the public-private partnership concept, and admirable to do that into not the main centres but some of the regions which will have many of the similar issues that we have here in New Zealand. So I wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you, Ryan.
In Australia, and be fantastic to have a chat again in a year and see where you've got to.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
If you like this episode, remember to subscribe for free on iTunes. Simply search for The Ryan Marketing Show in the iTunes Store.